and the vinyl acetate. These are all extremely serious human health threats that have been found in the air around the homes of Tara. We also did some sampling where we picked up a dichlorodifluoromethane, which is a very potent ozone depleter, one of the chlorofluorocarbons, which, if you remember, back in the sort of 90s was banned with the Montreal Protocol. We're not suggesting the industry is using these. What we're suggesting is that they are being formed as byproducts of that witch's brew that's going into the earth. The toluene was picked up at, in air above a residence water bore at well above the US chronic exposure limits, and just recently acrolein was picked up at what I thought was an extraordinarily high level when you look at the Texas acceptable. I just want to mention the QGC ERM report. That was the report that the Queensland government used when they did the Queensland Health Report to say that it was all okay. When you actually, again, if the media would actually read some of these reports, they would stop making stupid comments like, you know, this shows that everything's okay. Because when you read this industry report, they looked at 9 properties and they took 13 air samples. That means for some properties, and some of those properties are 50 acres or, you know, bigger, they took 1 air sample. Like taking 1 air sample on a large property, taking 1 air sample from this room would be about as valid as me jumping up. You know, it's just ridiculous. But to take them from large properties, then to make sure they didn't find anything that was exceeding of health criteria, they just set, for 26 of the most important chemicals, they set their detection level way, way above the health level. So they were made sure, and to give you an example, I think it was 111 tetrachloromethane. It's, from memory, its health criteria is somewhere around below 1 part per billion. They set their detection level. Some labs had 12 parts per billion, others had 8 parts per billion. So to give you an idea, they just made levels that would never show there was a problem. And when they did find benzene at well above the health level, they just dismissed it as an outlier. Just one of those things, well, we don't know why it's there, but it couldn't be true because it just couldn't be. And when I talked about, you know, the way that things can be transferred into water tanks, we also picked up methylene chloride, which is another chemical that the industry uses. Okay, next, I'll try to hurry on here. Impacts on health. Again, when the Queensland government's health report came out, media was clean bill of health for CSG. Actually, the report didn't say that at all. It said that it couldn't make the connections. Well, that's not surprising. Whenever you're looking at chemicals and chronic exposure, it's really hard to make that tight connection. But what they did acknowledge was that their regional department had found that some of the evidence might associate some of the resident symptoms to exposure to airborne CSG contaminants. That was the message that should have gone out with the media, but of course it didn't. Next one. I want to just stress when we talk about, you know, chemical exposure and what's acceptable. Children are not little adults. They have what's called windows of vulnerability when an exposure at that particular time in their development can have lifetime effects. You know, it can go on forever. An exposure to a cancer agent at the age of 1 at a particular time may cause cancer 20 years down the track. So we were really concerned, and again, that's a statement out of the WHO, not myself, when 50 of the Tara children, and I know some of you know Geraldine McCarran's brilliant, you know, report, Symptomology of a Gas Field, when she recorded 50 of the Tara children with severe irritations, rashes, headaches, and most worryingly, this paresthesia, which is the problems with extremities, pins and needles, difficulties feeling at the extremities. It indicates exposure to a neurotoxin, and that's why it's so worrying, because we don't know what else it's doing. There have been some studies that have just come out, the Mackenzie et al. Last year, and Hill a bit earlier, showed that for mothers who were pregnant and raising, going through their pregnancy, who lived close to wells in the hill paper. I think she had a 2.5 kilometre. Mackenzie said a 10 mile. That proximity indicated an increased incidence of defects, congenital heart defects and neural tube defects in their subsequent babies. All of this was justified because unconventional gas was clean, green and climate friendly. And I think the last words need to go to Akam Steiner, who is the director of the United Nations Environment Programme. And I personally thought his quote was gorgeous. When asked about what he thought about unconventional gas, that's what he replied. Sake of another 20 years of dirt cheap energy, we're really going to put millions of years of evolution of ecosystems, you know, at risk. Okay, last one. So there's my tribute to the Knitting Nanas, all my favourite photos. So thank you, Knitting Nanas. Love you all. So any questions?
5 minutes question.
Yep.
Mariann, can we get a copy of your paper? How do we do that?
No problem. I can get you a copy of this. It's a presentation, but nearly all of this is in our brief. And you know all of our other YouTubes are up on our website, which is just ntn.org.au. Feel free to download them, use them, distribute them however you like. I'm actually working on a redoing of our brief again because there's just so much comes out every year. So I will make sure that brief is up in the next month or so.
Could I email the presentation to the name?
You can email the presentation, yeah, feel free to email, yeah, no problem. But it's all referenced, everything's referenced in our doc. And can I just say one other thing I did mean to say, was that wherever we travel in the world, and we talk to people who are concerned about unconventional gas, the three things they know are lock the gate, Bentley, and the Knitting Nanas.
With all the information that you have and all that you've seen and all the big scary things that we hear from you, what do you feel about the future of the damage that has been done? Like, how do you see, I mean, it's a horrible question, but I do, like everyone in this room, I'm sure, really fear for Queensland. And that has happened, much to our horror, but, you know, what do you feel from your informed position about the rehabilitation of that or the future for that place?
I've got to say that's a horrible, horrible question.
It is
so
a horrible question, I'm really sorry. But I fear.
Yeah, of course, and I think certainly in my heart I feel what's happened to the water, that is the worry. The air pollution, some of that will disperse, but a lot of that will fall out and it will be increased contamination of soil. But I suppose I work on a lot of toxic issues, and so much of what I see is causing such irreparable damage. And I don't know what to say to people about that. All I can say is that we have an option to stop more damage. We have an option to stop it. And the thing that I really do feel is that we are winning. You know, you look at what's happening in the UK. We did our first talking tours in the UK 3 years ago, and everyone was despondent and didn't believe they could ever stop it. We did one last year and everyone's going, yay, you know, look what's happened in Australia, we can do it too. So I feel very positive about our ability to stop future damage, but dealing with our past legacy, is very, very hard. And in some ways, you cannot repair some of the damage that's been done. But that, unfortunately, is for a whole range of toxic issues. So.
That's always the thing they say, and I remember being really furious when the CEO of Santos was on the 7:30 report and blatantly said, we will leave it even better than we found it.
That's just such rubbish.
It's such a bald-faced lie.
Yes,
and
it
I
is.
think,
It
how
is.
can they keep saying it?
Yeah, it is. I think there was one question more, and then I'll leave. Yep.
The flaring that we're seeing now up in the gas fields, which is ramped up, you know, so much in the last little while, I suppose since Gladstone's come online.
Yeah.
what exactly is that emitting? What comes out of that? I understand that they'll have to burn the dirty bits out before it goes through and so on, and that's part of the reasoning, but why do they flare and what's in it?
Well, in the words of iGas, Ed doesn't matter if flaring's good or bad, it's just what industry does. I think that's what he told the Parliament in the UK, which I thought was jolly. Usually what you see from flaring is yes, you'll get a bit of methane, you'll get some of the byproducts of methane, but you'll also get some heavy metals, and most importantly, you get polyaromatic hydrocarbons, or the PAHs. And I know there's some work being done by Effie here on PAHs somewhere, but certainly they are a big issue because they are one of the, you just can't get away. If you burn something, you will get PAHs. The flaring also, the EU put out a paper last year which basically said that flaring from oil and gas were the largest producers of black soot in the Arctic. Yeah. Which of course is another whole climate issue. So you can have again, it's an aerial which is brew. Dioxin's another thing that you will usually find. It depends when they flare how much of the other substances, like if you flare methane that have got chlorinated compounds with it, then you're going to have higher levels of dioxin. If the levels of chlorinated compounds are low, you'll get lower levels of dioxin. But particulates, methane, PAHs are probably the three. But flaring, the US EPA has effectively said that companies cannot flare. There's a few exceptions, but they cannot flare after January 2015. Now, we're all actually looking to see how that's panning out and how many exemptions. But the reason they did that was because air pollution was such a problem from flaring. So when, our governments say, oh, flaring's fine, again, it's just rubbish.
In your presentation, there's one part where it said something along the lines of if it's a marine soil, you know what I mean? That it was actually worse. Like the coal, the things that come up out of the ground.
As much as it's bad what goes down, the release of the natural contaminants are as equally bad.
Well, it's the further south you go in the Gloucester Valley, the more marine.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay. I think I've run out of time.